as a person that's going to get into payments, it's starting with what's your why. And in that, what's the number you need to get to, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got to back into how you get there. The idea that you've got to be, 100% or not, some super high split isn't really what you need. What you need is the ability to get to whatever that number is.
Hey everybody, James Shepard here with the Merchant Sales Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. As you can see, I got a good friend here with me today, Ben. So how's it going there, Ben?
Good. How you doing, James?
Doing great. So before we dive into the podcast today, we've got a great interview talking about the pitfalls that merchant sales agents run into in this business. Before we get into that, Ben, tell us about the event that you and I are doing together coming up.
For sure. So we've got a dinner in New York City at the Plume, part of the Ivory Peacock. It's in the Flatiron District in New York City, June 26th, 6 to 8 p.m. Would love to have you there. What you're going to see, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but we're about bringing agents together and really talking about where the industry's at, the solutions that are out there, what's coming forward, and what everyone should be aware of. So be networking, open, really any payments professionals, people, whether they're on the solution side, the payment side, really anyone that's in the industry, would love to have you there. You can register at ccsalespro.com/NYC. Would love to see you there. We'll also have an open house at our office on the 27th, 12 to 2. There'll be lunch served, meet some of the team. Would love to have you there and look forward to seeing you all there.
Awesome. And it is on June 26th, right?
Yep.
So June 26th, again, ccsalespro.com/NYC. And I want to make it clear too, I think a lot of times just sales agents are the only ones that think they can come to this. Like if you're a payments professional in New York City, come check it out. If you're an ISV and you're like, what is this payments industry? I keep watching James's podcast and trying to understand it. Come check it out. I will be there. I'll do kind of a little, I don't know if you call it a keynote, but a little speech. Yeah. And then you'll have a team there. I'll have some people from my team there. So you're just, if you want to be in a room with a bunch of payments professionals, this is the place to be. If you're in New York City or anywhere nearby, drive in, come check it out. We would love to have you there. So one more time, it's ccsalespro.com/NYC. If you're in the area, stop what you're doing right now. Pause the podcast, go to ccsalespro.com/NYC and sign up. With that being said, let's dive into the interview. All right, everybody, I'm here with my good friend, Ben, from Green Payments. How you doing today, Ben?
Good. How you doing, James?
Doing great. So, Ben, you actually drove all the way out here today just to be on this podcast. So our listeners can feel appreciated by that, right? So
that's it. We are here, and it was a good 5-hour drive here, 5-hour drive back, but well worth it, and fortunately, beautiful weather. So.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. Appreciate you coming out. So today we're talking about pitfalls of agents, right, in this industry, things that they run into. Before we dive into that, give everybody a little bit. I mean, I know you've been on a lot of my podcasts, but help everybody know kind of who you are and what you do.
Totally. So Ben Ross, Chief Operating Officer of Green Payments. My focus day to day is working with our partners and really helping them build strong, sustainable portfolios. And, in a world of verticalized solutions and stuff that you and I have talked about endlessly, but in a good way, it constantly changes. So really my primary focus is staying on top of, what are the solutions that are out there? What do our partners need? What are the tools and resources that we need to surround them with to be able to build successfully and build a real business, build something that they can be proud of. It's not just, boarding accounts and just successful wins there, but really building something with a strong foundation.
I like the word you use, they're building a real business. I think a lot of agents, when they come into the industry, they think of it as a gig almost or something. For sure. And it's like, if you think of that, that's how it's going to be, but you can actually build a real business out of this. Yeah. I've seen the best agents do that.
100%. Look, naturally, people that are most successful in our business are salespeople, right? Because that's just the nature of most businesses, and driving the growth is the sales side of it. But at the same time, if you focus just on the sale and just on the next sale and the next sale, you can lose sight of really what you're building, fundamentally. And I think that's where we try to come in and really mentor and work with our partners to help them with that. Because I agree with you, there's a lot to that.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about pitfalls. I guess the best place to start is right at the beginning. So for the agents that are out there, maybe they're watching this podcast and they're like brand new to the industry, or maybe they're looking for a new partner right now. Yep. What do you see as the biggest pitfalls that they could fall into easily in this industry when they're like, I'm looking for that partnership, trying to start from the beginning?
For sure. I would say the main one is from an agreement perspective, making sure you actually read through what you're signing. I think, again, we can all get excited from a sales perspective of, hey, it's a great partner. They've got a great solution. I want to go offer it. I've got a merchant. They're ready to do it. It's a lot of money in the deal. I want to get it done, right? And that's great. Speed is great. But I think it's important to be diligent, because at the end of the day, in our business, you're really marrying before you date, right? You're coming to an agreement and you're getting out, you're bringing your merchants to the table, and you're in. Once you're in, you're in. And the accounts are boarded. The last thing you want to do is, 2-3 years in, you find out that it's not a good relationship.
Right.
And at that point, it can be challenging. And then you have to kind of dig through all of that. And now you're 2-3 years into building a business and having to reassess. So I think to me, it's about really being diligent up front, reviewing the agreement. There's definitely, a lot of specifics to dig into there. But I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. What about when you think about the specifics of that? When you look at an agreement, if you had to name the top 2 or 3, terms of the agreement or conditions that agents tend to maybe unknowingly agree to that cause them problems, what would those be?
I'd say the number one is minimums, right? So having either a minimum dollar amount or deal count from typically a monthly basis is how it'll be written, can be detrimental, right? Because we all know life happens. And, the idea in our business is to build really strong residual income and a residual portfolio. And at the end of the day, if you do that, and then 2-3 years in, 6 months in, you've got $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month coming in, and maybe you have a kid, there's an illness in the family, you just want to go away and travel Europe for a month, and then not realizing that when you come back, you suddenly don't get your residual payment. And then you call, well, I didn't get my payment, I didn't change my bank account, is it an issue, what's going on? Oh, well, we saw last month that you didn't get any deals, and we were reaching out, we didn't hear back from you. And so, what do you mean? And then that's when you find out. So that's why reading the agreement and making sure those minimums aren't there is huge. And I unfortunately hear those stories all too often. I do too. And it's just unfortunate, because the beauty of our business is the residual, and the stability that should bring to create an environment where you can truly look out for your client's best interest, your family's best interest, if whatever that means. If you need to focus on your kids, your parents, your siblings, whatever, a friend that's in need, you have the time to go and spend with them. To then lose that because of a contract, because some company doesn't really care about you as a human and your kind of personal being, I think is unfortunate. But that's super important. And then I think the other big piece is exclusivity. And I think the reason for that is because of our industry focusing so much from a verticalized perspective and the solutions that are needed, you do need options for your partners. And while I feel strongly at Green Payments, we have essentially all of the solutions that you need, there are solutions that are locked to specific processors. And you may want to offer that solution to your merchant because it may be what they want. And if you can access it, maybe you won't make the same revenue you would make with us with a different solution or with a different partner. But at least you can make something and maintain the relationship. And you don't want to have an agreement that keeps you from doing that.
Well, I think ultimately the concept of being held captive by an agreement, it's just a bad idea. To me, the 2 things I always tell agents is I'm like, okay, number one, you need to make sure that if you're in the hospital for 6 months, God forbid, that your family is still getting their residual check, which is what you mentioned with minimums and other things like that. That's number one. And then number 2 is you need to make sure that if the person that you trust gets hit by a bus, that you're also still okay. Now in our industry, the bus is obviously very uncommon. The common thing is the acquisition, which is the same effect. So it's like, oh, I'm dealing with XYZ ISO. They seem super honest, really transparent. They promised me that they would take care of me, so I signed the agreement. Well, the problem is XYZ ISO gets acquired by ZZZ ISO that's massively larger, and they're like, oh, well, your agreement allows us to screw you out of your residuals. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to screw you out of your residuals. So that's the big one there. And so I think it's like agents get caught up in this, like, well, I talked to this guy, and he just seems super honest and really nice. And he told me, oh, don't worry about that in the agreement. I'll take care of you. Well, it's like, well, I appreciate that, and I'm not saying anything bad about you, but you might get hit by a bus tomorrow, God forbid. I need to make sure the agreement states what it needs to state.
100%. Look, there's a lot of great industry attorneys. We will even encourage our partners to go to a payments attorney. Make sure they know payments, right? Because to your point, it is important that everything's buttoned up, everything's there and simple, easily interpreted, and no confusion is left open.
Okay, so beyond the agreement, right? What are other things? I'm comparing, 3 different ISOs, right? And it's like, okay, the agreement's solid with all 3. What else? What else do I look at?
I think from my perspective, it's then the solutions and the offerings, right? Do you have enough platforms to be able to board accounts? Do you have enough solutions to offer merchants? Are you just focused on terminals on a counter, right? Because the reality is that's the way of the past. Doesn't mean not to have that solution. And something you'll hear me say often is, be verticalized, but have those horizontal options, right? Because you want both.
Right.
You want to get in the door typically with a horizontal kind of simple to place solution. But then when that merchant needs it, whether it's the first discussion or 6 months in or 5 years into the relationship, when they're ready to dig deeper and get a full point of sale or a full verticalized software solution, you want to have that, as well. So I think to me, it's really identifying the solutions that they have.
Yeah.
And then above that, it's the support that comes with those solutions and the day-to-day support on the payment side. Making sure that, if there's a need you've got someone to call, maybe it's text, maybe it's email, someone that you can truly reach out to see your solution, see your issue through.
So what's really interesting, Ben, is like we're sitting here talking about this, right? And so we just had a pretty good conversation about the initial part, except we still haven't even mentioned the only thing that most agents actually care about, which is compensation.
That's fair. Yeah, that is true. Yeah,
but I say that because what we've seen with our experience is that actually, that's like obviously you want to have good compensation.
Yeah.
But when you elevate that to be like, well, what's the split? What's the split? What's the split? And you're like, well, first of all, you don't even understand your Schedule A.
Yep.
So what you think you got isn't what you got anyway. But so talk about this. How do we think about compensation and how do we balance that against, well, what am I getting in exchange for maybe I have a slightly lower split, but I'm getting this support? Like, how do we balance this out?
The way I see it is starting with what's your actual goal, right? So even when we launched Green Payments, right, we came together and said, what is our goal in building Green Payments, right? And there was a lot of layers to that, right? Stability for our families and the opportunity for our friends and people that we know that we could bring into the business and people we could help and merchants and how we could help them. I mean, there's a lot of layers in why you do something. To me, as a person that's going to get into payments, it's starting with what's your why, and in that, what's the number you need to get to, right? And then you've got to back into how you get there, and the idea that you've got to be, 100% or not, some super high split, right? 90%, isn't really what you need. What you need is the ability to get to whatever that number is. For some people, it's 10,000 a month. Some people, it's 5,000. Some people, it's 20, 50, 100, and beyond, right? In some cases, they want to build a team. They want to build a whole sales office. They want to build their own ISO eventually, right? To me, it's figuring out what that end goal is. And sometimes you're doing it in stages over, next 2 years, I want to get here. Next 6 months, I want to get here. But it's mapping that out. And then I think getting with a partner that wants to really strategically work with you to help you get there. And the numbers will back into themselves, right? And how aggressive you need to be on your end. Are you going for a high rev share split? And guess what? That means typically, equipment investment may be on your end, and other things on your end you may need to invest in, your own support staff, your own admin to help with data entry of applications at times, or reviewing reports. Or on the other side, are you open to a lower rev share and then having all that support provided to you, and now you no longer need to make that capital investment? So those are, I think, the decisions to make. And for an agent that's going into it, it really should be about how do you get there with the path to least resistance, which typically is a lower rev share, and then working with a company that partners with you to strategically lay out a plan to get the accounts that you need and and grow how you need to grow.
Yeah, there's so many agents I've talked to where they're looking at two agreements. One's 70% split, one's 90. Yeah. And I'm like, well, yeah, you could take the 90 as long as you're willing to have your own deployment department, as long as you're going to have your own customer service team, et cetera. And it's like, well, does that make sense? It's like, well, are you going to do 500 deals a month?
Right.
And they're like, no, I'm going to do 10. Okay, well then no, it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
You want the lower split and you want to outsource that. So I think that's, like, to your point, it's kind of like there are all of these things that have to be done.
Yep.
Someone has to do them. So it's like, who's going to do these things?
Yeah.
Are you going to do them, or are you looking for a partner to do them? Well, if you want your partner to do them, you want to be ready and understanding that the partner needs to make enough money to offset the cost of doing those things.
Yep.
And it can be a little tricky. So, all right. So let's say an agent's like, okay, they go through all that, they find the right solution, they jump into the partnership, right? And now it's like, I got to get out there and make some sales, right? What are the pitfalls or challenges that they tend to face at that kind of next step in the process?
I think once they're out selling, it's really understanding what they're selling, right? Whether it be on the payment side, what are the numbers, what's on the statement, right? Or the solution. And and what is the merchant looking for? And I think one of the biggest things that I find, especially as our business has shifted more to a solutions-based sell, people are so focused on selling the solution, right? Whatever that point of sale system is, whether that's, Union, which we've talked a lot about, whether that's Dealer Genie or Automotive Solution, whether that's Cashier Live or Pharmacy One, whether it's something as simple as Clover, whatever the solution is, they get so stuck on selling the solution that they lose sight of what's the merchant really looking for.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big piece, is asking those questions.
Yeah.
And then the other element of it, I think, on the payment side of it, specifically, is understanding the statement and being able to then present a reasonable proposal. So on our end, we leverage, your solution ISOAMP, right? And we utilize that for all of our statement analysis, because with that, we're able to dig in and better understand, okay, is there padded interchange where the other processor is making it seem like that's just regular?
Looks like a really good rate, but it's not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or, is it a good rate, right? And now what are we competing against? Because with that, we now know how we can present from that side of it. And we can help our partner present effectively what they need to do and know how to price things, right? Because look, there's all different ways to price things in our business. And we all know, we may have certain ways we price things. Other companies will have a multitude of other ways of pricing things. It's knowing how things are set up to then be able to know how you can present to compete and win the business on the payment side, putting aside the solution.
Yeah, it is crazy. Like, there's just so much to learn now, I feel like, in the industry. And I think, again, it's kind of the same thing we just talked about, right? It's like, what are you going to do versus what your partner going to do? Yeah. But even the sales process, that's so crucial. Like, I know with you guys, you do so much like hand holding with like Dealer Genie and these other, and look at Union. Yep. I mean, Union like does the demo, they do the install, they kind of, so they're really into it, and I think it's a question of like, for the agent, they really need to go, okay, am I going to become an expert at, one vertical? Am I going to become an expert at 7? If I'm only going to become an expert at one vertical, is that the only vertical I'm going to sell? Or do I want to be able to sell these other 5, but I need a partnership that's going to allow me to do that? And I think those are all like super important questions. And it goes back to something we talked about at the beginning, which is I feel like the industry, when I get into the business, everybody had 7 processors that they worked with.
Yep.
And then it kind of changed over time where everybody kind of had their like one that they used. And I feel like now we're seeing still, it's like you want to have your primary that you're like 80-90% committed to, but then you kind of have these other ones, you know what I mean? And so I think it's you have to be really strategic today, I think, it's like, what are you trying to sell? What are you going to do? What are you going to become an expert at? And if you're not, well, you better have a partner that's going to be an expert.
Exactly right. And that's where I think the lack of, forced exclusivity in your agreement is important, because it will give you that flexibility over time to adjust and pivot when you need to. And I agree. I mean, to me, I think you pick 1, 2, maybe 3 specific verticals that well. Maybe it's the industry you've worked in. You sold cars forever, so you have a lot of relationships in that. You were a doctor, you were a pharmacist, whatever it may be. Right now, you're kind of in your next phase of life, or semi-retired, and you want to go build a book. There's different ways and kind of that you get to the business. So I think it's identifying that and figuring out where you want to focus, what industries you want to be involved with. But then, to your point, it's having the broad array of solutions so that you can go after as many of the opportunities that come in front of you as possible. The last thing you want is you spend a year, 2 years chasing an opportunity. Even if it's, 3 times you knocked on their door and suddenly you're in the door and now can't sell them because you don't have the right solution. And so that's where that flexibility is definitely important.
Yeah. One thing, a side note to that I'm interested to get your take on. I mean, I know you guys do quite a bit of Clover.
Yep.
What are your thoughts? And you mentioned earlier kind of the horizontal and the vertical, right? I know it's a little bit of a rabbit trail maybe, but I'm just curious, like when you talk to agents and explain this to them, because obviously the industry is shifting to that vertical solution.
Yep.
But from an agent perspective, there's some interesting things to selling the horizontal. What do you advise these agents to kind of generally, I know it's general advice, but how do you advise them to handle that kind of difference or offering solutions like that?
I think it comes down to figuring out what the merchant is looking for, right? Asking those questions up front. Right. Sure. And not forcing a merchant to a specific solution because in your mind, that's what they need. And that's going to help them run their business better because they know how they want to run their business. Look, it's similar if you go back many years to, the barber that was cash only. You were never going to force them to accept payments. Right. They have other reasons they're cash only, right? They have reasons they run the business the way they do, right? I went to into a friend's restaurant just the other day, my family, and, they have a little payment terminal on the counter, but they have a full point of sale in the business. Right. So my family said, well, why are they set up that way? I said, you can draw your own conclusions, right? They choose, and we don't do the account, but at the end of the day, they're set up with a side terminal and a full point of sale. People are going to make their own choice how they run their business. We'll never force them to do it a certain way. our job is to advise and ask questions, and then once we know what they're looking for, help get them that solution. Yeah. And so I think that's where the horizontal solutions come in, and kind of having one that, they may want to grow into something, right? They may, want to start with just a basic payment terminal, but they say, you know what, in 6 months, I'm going to start inventorying my items. I'm going to start, having my employees clock in and clock out. Yeah. I want to roll out a rewards program. Like, there may be limited things they want to do where, a Clover type solution is a good fit. Right. And they want to move off of a pure terminal over time. And that's where that horizontal option comes in.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I love the question because it's like so hard to, I think for the agents and, to like really understand that is difficult. It's a complicated industry right now. And it's like, in some ways the payments industry doesn't really exist anymore in a weird way. It's kind of like now it's like the payments is like part of this larger narrative. Yeah. And so figuring out how to present that. But yeah, I mean, it's like there are merchants out there where they just want a credit card machine. They don't want a rocket ship on their counter. They just want a credit card machine, and that's all they want right now. One of the things I always advise agents, though, is like you do want to make sure that every merchant knows that you have the better solution.
100%.
Because otherwise, they're going to see an ad on Facebook for some vertical specific solution. Yep. And the next thing you know, you're not getting any processing, and you're like, what's going on? And like, oh, we switched to this other company, 100%. And they have their own payment. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I know that you would really benefit from the solution, but I also could recognize that the timing is not right. Yep. So let's get you set up with Clover Mini. Let's get you set up with this terminal. Yep. But understand that whenever you're like, man, I really wish I had this feature or that feature, let me know. We're happy to do a demo. Right. So you kind of are building that relationship.
100%. And it is exactly right. And then even after that, from a marketing and just a relationship perspective, when you check in with them, reminding them. So one thing that we do, we'll actually call through all of our merchants to touch base, right? On some of the verticals that tend to be a bit more attrition, restaurants and retail, right? We will proactively call every merchant 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, and check in with them. Because it may be Friday night, terminal went down, some issue happened. Right. Weekend's busy, they're crazy, they don't reach out. Right. Then the week comes, and now they're either catching up on sleep they didn't get, or busy just with life and everything else, getting ready for the next busy weekend, and they don't reach out. And then suddenly, some competitor shows up the next Friday night for dinner. Right. Oh, I'll replace your system. I'll fix that for you. Right. And then now you're questioning things, right? So it's important to have that ongoing discussion and not just check in the way I was just mentioning, but also reminding them. Look, if you just have a terminal today, we can get you a full system. Or you have this type of system, but you want something that, has some other feature, we have that, right? And making sure that the merchant's aware.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so let's move forward here. So we have kind of this last phase. So the agents, they found a partner, they signed up, they got some deals, they're starting to build a portfolio, they got $3,000-4,000 a month in residual. What are the pitfalls at kind of the end of this process of making sure that they're able to continue to grow and build to the next level?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces is cash flow, right? So they get to that first phase, they're out, they're beginning to sign accounts, but realistically in our business, it takes time to build that portfolio, right? Yeah. So it may take 6 months to get to 5,000 or 7,000 or 10,000 a month. It's going to depend on the verticals you go after, how many doors you're knocking, how many calls you're making, how quick you want to grow, and where deals fall, right? There's no secret science to it, but at the end of the day, it does take time, right? That's the only thing that is, there for everyone. Right. And so I think one of the things that we've recently launched is the ability to offer leasing, right? And placement of terminals. Sure. Not in a way, kind of the old school, you're going to take a basic, $200, $300 terminal, and now it's $200 a month, right? Not that way, right? But being able to say, look, instead of having to invest $20,000 into this system for this restaurant, we can offer it with a payment, a monthly payment, helps to lock in the merchant long term, right? Which is good for everyone from a stickiness, perspective. But also there is then the ability to build in a little bit of initial money for that sale, for the implementation, for that piece that the agent is doing. And so that's something that we've recently launched, and we've seen the excitement from our partners, because it does help them in that beginning when they're beginning to build that cash flow. Our business being 1099, many of our agents, they come into it, maybe they were in some other industry, they had a W-2 role, whatever it may be. A lot of times they need cash flow quick. Yeah. And so it gives them that ability as they're selling and scaling earlier to build in some additional cash flow for them.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's like when the agents come in, they, a lot of times don't have a lot of money in the bank. right? And they come in and they need to generate that cash flow. And then meanwhile, you also have the cash flow of the merchant to think about. You know, they don't want to spend $3,000 up front or $4,000 up front. And there now are like so many other competitors that'll come out and a Toast or whatever, and they'll say, oh, we'll give this to you for X amount per month or even for free. And so you have to have those options to be able to come in there and close that deal. You want to get that yes.
Yep. And
so, yeah, I think that's huge. You know, leasing is such like an anathema, you know, because I think like you said, for so long, people like, I mean, when I get into the industry, I was selling a Hypercom T4210 for $99 a month for 60 months. So $6,000 for a $150 terminal at the time. I had no idea, you know, and I was getting my $500 commission, which I thought was fantastic. I didn't realize the company was making $3,000-4,000 every time I sold one. And so, but maybe you could, for those that are maybe newer to the industry and haven't been around for the leasing, maybe give a little more detail. What exactly is leasing? If I'm a merchant, like how exactly does that work?
For sure. So the way that it works is you're going to have a monthly payment that, you know, is funded. So let's say the equipment costs $2,000 as an example. Let's say the payment's, you know, $100 a month for say 36 months. The merchant over 36 months is going to pay $3,600. Obviously, some of that goes towards the interest on the equipment, the $2,000 that's paid out, and then the other portion, some of it would go back to the partner. And so, in the end, the merchant signs an agreement for 36 months, $100 a month. They pay it. And it's separate from the processing. It's very simple, and it helps again to lock them in. But it also covers that $2,000. So instead of you or you know or us or really anyone having to come out of pocket that $2,000, merchant pays it, and everything is funded that way.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and again, just you have a couple things there, right? You have the idea of needing to finance the hardware, cash flow for the agent, cash flow for the merchant, all these things come together. Leasing is a good option. Some companies are doing hardware as a service where you have like a rental fee. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of skin that cat. I've even seen some like, 12 months, 0% financing or what. So, but you need to have those options. And I think that goes back to kind of common pitfalls is like going with a partner that has nothing. You know, or going with a partner that has something for traditional terminals or Clover, but they don't have anything for the large. It's like, to me, the larger ones are the ones you get stuck on where you're like, I'm going to make $1,000 a month, but I need $20,000 in equipment. You need to have a way to get those deals done. And again, leasing has just been around so long. As long as you're doing it in an honest, transparent way, it can be a really great way to you know, help the merchant while generating income for yourself.
Totally agree. And for us, it's being layered onto placement. It's being layered onto free equipment, right? Other programs that we have that we've you and I have talked about in the past. So it's not removing those other programs, right? But to your point, maybe it is a lot of times everyone's willing to give free equipment and put it out there if there's dual pricing and big margin, sure, no problem, right? But now it's a large merchant, high volume, but thin margin, right? Great. Maybe they're the bar restaurant right in the middle of Main Street. And if you can get them, you can get everyone in town, or you know, it's some really visible merchant, big national brand, but it's going to take a major investment on equipment. The economics may not really make sense that way, but that's where this leasing can come in. And now they may know, look, you know what, we understand we've negotiated, you're really strong on payments. We know, you know, I mean, the numbers, the economics are very clear. We, you know, we're not putting that on you. We know this is our point of sale system in our business. We're willing to pay for that. Here's some options. And so, I think to your point, it's an extra layer on top of all the other options so that we can then sit with our partners and sit with our agents and say, how do you want to go to market? What is the message you want with your community, with your relationships? How do you want to sell? What do you want to sell? And then really kind of from there, figure out the strategy that works for them.
Love it. Ben, it's always great having you on the podcast. Before we finish up today, though, I would love for you to kind of give your elevator pitch a little bit for Green Payments and tell agents and ISOs where they can go to learn more if they want to find out more about working with you guys.
For sure. So you can go to greenpayments.io. You can also call our office anytime, 800-567-4729. And you could also email info@greenpayments.io. Love to connect, discuss where you're at in your business life cycle. If you're in the beginning phase, if you're deeper into it, maybe you've been in the industry for a long time, would love to connect and see how we can help.
Awesome. Love it. It's great. Well, Ben, thank you so much for driving all the way out here to be on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I always love having it in person. It's a lot of fun. So thanks so much for being here today.
Same here. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.